Hello from Browns Bay. It's the 12th of May, and it's two sleeps before our level 2 lockdown. And tonight I thought I'd share some things about hope with you. Over the years, I've spent time often with people who have been nearing the end of their lives. Thankfully, not many of them have been children. It's very hard to explain to little children what we believe about time and eternity. I remember when teaching year twos, how one little boy asked me one day during the lesson, "Is David dead?" Speaking of King David in the Bible. "Oh, yes," I replied, "a long time ago." And then the questions came. When was he alive? Did he die as long ago as when I was small? How long is 1,000 years? With adults, when you've lived a long life, eternity and dying seem easier to get your head around, although dying can still be a fearful prospect. Hope, of course, is always factored in. The hope, or the certainty rather, of life after death. But hope isn't just a concept for us when we're dying. It's something we have when the stuff we are facing each day feels like death, like a long lesson for young people at school, or perhaps a boring sermon in church. I recall seeing a whole book once about things you can do during a boring sermon, or a difficult task at work, or the prospects of the day being long and uninspiring or lonely. The hope of Friday and the weekend seems to keep many people going, and also those who are hopeful as they look forward to Christmas and the holidays. Of course, at this time, during the pandemic, hope for a normal future seems a bit shattered in some ways, but it's still on our list. In Psalm 25, we read about that King David, who wrote, "No one whose hope is in you will ever be put to shame, but they will be put to shame who are treacherous without excuse." Here, I think hope is closer to trust. David's enemies were real, and his war was a real war. His faith in God's presence with him extends to the hope that God would give him success. For Paul in the Bible, there are troubles too. The Christian life is not a simple life. Listen to the progression of his ideas in Romans 5, which include hope. He says, "And we rejoice in the hope of the glory of God. Not only so, but we rejoice in our sufferings, because we know that sufferings produce perseverance, perseverance character, and character hope." And then he says this, "And hope does not disappoint us, because God's love has been poured out into our hearts by the Holy Spirit, whom he has given us." It sounds like a challenging ride, doesn't it? Sufferings, perseverance, character are all aspects of a life of faith and adventure, and they produce hope, not just because we hope for things to get better, or trials and tribulations to end, but for Paul, hope that does not disappoint us, because it's not a vain hope, because we're not alone, because God has poured out his love into our hearts by the Holy Spirit, whom he has given us. It's God's love keeping us through these trials. Love is a very powerful thing. Think of your children or perhaps your grandchildren today. Sometimes they just plod along, not quite sure what's going on in their lives, and suddenly they might fall in love. It's amazing what a difference it can be in their attitude and motivation. God's love, of course, is the different kind of love. It's not that romantic love, although the prophets complained that when people turned their backs on God, they were being unfaithful and adulterous. It's not a physical love, although the relationship between Jesus and the church is described as a bridegroom and a bride. God's love is powerful and strengthening. His presence gives confidence and courage, whether we're facing death or just disappointment and challenges in this life. We are still full of hope, which does not disappoint. I love hopeful people. They're optimistic, they look for solutions, they're open-minded, they're good listeners. They seem to see the best in people, even though they make mistakes. And you can't get a more hopeful person than Jesus. He chooses people for his leadership team you would not have on your short list, I suppose. He takes rough and risky ones like Peter, knowing that the impulsiveness was not always a weakness, but sometimes a strength. He knew that Peter would fail, but that he would be strengthened in character to the extent that he could face anything. Jesus models in his life and death as well hope at every level. At Easter, hope is never far from our thoughts because of God's plan to face death and resurrection and to give us hope for the future. At this time, some of us might feel down or depressed or hopeless. We might not have heard the answers or the solutions that we'd expected. Sometimes we need our hope restored and renewed as well. And I think through prayer and waiting on God, that's a real possibility. My prayer is that you might know His hope, that you might be certain about the future being a good thing, a place where God is already waiting for you. May you know that sunrise follows the darkness of night, that spring brings new growth after the desperation of a bad winter, that a new beginning follows every failure or disappointment. As you pray, think about Jesus, who in Matthew 12, verse 21 is described in this way. Matthew says, "In his name the nations will put their hope." He's quoting from Isaiah 42. While we don't see countries necessarily putting their hope in him, nations here is not necessarily governments. It's more likely refers to the variety of peoples on the earth. I pray that many people around the world at this time will find good news in Jesus, who is their hope. May you be encouraged in your prayers and continue to pray for all without hope, and especially for those who are desperate in this city, in this nation, and in this world, that they may be drawn to a Christian fellowship where they can meet this hope of the nations, Jesus. So God bless you on this day. May your hopes be fulfilled. May your dreams still come true. May you be certain that the future will be a bright one. Take care, and we'll talk again. Bye-bye from Browns Bay.